The first shovel of earth hit my father's coffin with a hollow thud, and I swear I felt in my chest. A drizzle had turned the cemetery clay into something between mud and blood, spattering my polished boots like a warning. I shook the priest's hand, nodded at the neighbors, and forced my face into the mask everyone expected of me. Strong son, steady man, too stubborn to cry. By the time I reached my truck, the mask was cracking. The rain beat on the windshield, blurring the world outside, and I just sat there breathing the faint scent of Old Spice that still clung to my jacket. My father's jacket, the one I wore to remind myself that the man who built everything I had was gone. That's when I saw her. Karen Whitmore didn't belong in a graveyard. Not because of her age, 30-something and surgically frozen at 32, but because of the way she smiled in places where no one should smile. She glided between headstones like she was working a charity gala, not a funeral. Her umbrella was expensive, her perfume louder than the rain, and the folder in her hand matched her heels like she'd planned the whole performance. "Marcus," she purred as I opened the door, her voice bright as wet gravel. "So sorry for your loss." I hadn't even taken off my funeral gloves before she pressed the envelope into my palm. Thick paper, heavy ink, the kind of certified letter that always smells like trouble. "Business can't wait," she said, as though that excused it. Then she turned, designer heels stabbing mud, and disappeared into the maze of monuments. I tore the letter open in the driver's seat. One glance at the figure inside, $250,000, and the drizzle outside turned to a roar in my ears. A fine, a threat, a promise to strip my family's land to the bone for supposed violations. I gripped the steering wheel until the leather creaked. My father hadn't been in the ground an hour, and already someone was circling like a vulture. This is how it starts, I thought. This is how they take everything from you if you let them. The road home cut through fields that used to belong to us. My grandfather bought that spread in 1952 with cash earned welding pipelines and hauling stone. Back then it was all cornrows and cattle fences, not cul-de-sacs and fountains. The workshop he built still stood like a stubborn sentinel beside the old ranch house. Sheet metal roof, scarred wooden doors, the smell of machine oil soaked so deep you could almost hear it humming. When I pushed the door open, the rain followed me inside in streaks of silver light. Tools lined the walls like soldiers waiting for orders. My daughter Emma's latest project, an oak shelf she'd sanded by hand, sat half-finished on the workbench. 16 years old, she'd rather learn to use her great-grandfather's planer than scroll through TikTok. Every time I saw her in that shop, I knew why I had to fight. I dropped the envelope onto the workbench. The paper slid across the oak and came to rest against my father's old welding mask. That mask had been on 3 generations of faces. My grandfather wore it when he refused to sell out to the first developer who came waving cash. My father wore it when he taught me that steel bends only if you heat it long enough, and people are no different. I would wear it for what was coming next. Outside, the rain eased to a cold mist. Across the street, in her pristine colonial with its imported Italian fountain, I saw Karen Whitmore watching from behind silk curtains, phone pressed to her ear. She wasn't waiting for condolences. She was planning her next move. She thought this was about code violations and property lines. She thought she could scare me with letters and lawyers. But she just declared war on the wrong family. And she had no idea the ground she was standing on wasn't even hers. The next morning, the rain had cleared, but the air still tasted like iron. Idee barely slipped. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father lowering into the ground and that envelope sliding across the workbench like a snake. Emma came by early for her weekend visit, a blur of energy in sneakers and headphones. She dropped her bag on the porch and looked at me with those sharp hazel eyes that missed nothing. "Dad, you look like you haven't slept in a week," she said, brushing sawdust off the railing. "Is this about Grandpa?" I wanted to tell her everything. About the fine, about Karen, about the way grief curdles into anger when someone tries to take what your family bled for. But I swallowed it. She deserved one more weekend of being 16, not worrying about lawyers and lawsuits. "Just busy with work," I lied. Emma narrowed her eyes, clearly unconvinced, but didn't push. Instead, She disappeared into the workshop, humming while she tightened clamps on her oak shelf. The sound of her hands on what steadied me. That shop was a lifeline, a reminder that not everything in this world could be bought or bullied away. But the peace didn't last long. By noon, a white SUV rolled to a stop in front of my house. The HOA seal on the door told me exactly what this was. Two men in tailored suits stepped out, clipboard warriors, not neighbors. One started snapping photos of my driveway, while the other walked straight to my porch like he owned the place. "Mr. Castellano?" His smile was professional and predatory. "We're here to confirm violations listed in your notice." I let the screen door creak open. "Violations on land that isn't part of your subdivision? Sure. Confirm away." His smile faltered. "This is a required inspection." "Not without a warrant, it isn't," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Step off my porch." The man hesitated, then turned on his heel without a word. But I caught the way his partner's camera lingered on my workshop, clicking like a rattlesnake tail. By evening, Karen herself strutted across the street. The heels, the perfume, the practiced sympathy were all back. She didn't even look at Emma, who was sanding her shelf just 10 feet away. "Marcus, you're making this harder than it needs to be," Karen said, lips curved into that Botox smile that never reached her eyes. "The board has standards. It's not personal." "Funny," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "Filing a $250,000 fine on the day of my father's funeral feels personal." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes flashed. "Comply and it all goes away. No lawyers, no drama." "Not happening." Her heels clicked away, sharp as gunfire on the pavement. I watched her vanish into her spotless house, then looked at Emma. "Who was that?" she asked, brow furrowed. "Someone who doesn't understand the meaning of no," I muttered. That night, after Emma went to bed, I dug through my father's old filing cabinets. Yellow deeds, surveyor maps, tax receipts dating back to the Eisenhower administration, all of it meticulously organized. My father believed in keeping records, because land remembers. I traced boundary lines with a calloused finger, comparing them to what I knew of the neighborhood. Something didn't add up. The workshop, the old fence rows, the grove of oaks at the property edge, the subdivision map I'd seen last year showed different lines. Off by feet, maybe yards. At midnight, I called Jake Morrison, an old friend and county surveyor. "Marcus? You all right?" he asked, voice rough with sleep. "Need a favor," I said. "Bring your GPS gear. I think these clowns are standing on the wrong side of the line." Jake whistled low. "You're talking about the HOA, right?" "Yeah, and I've got a bad feeling they built more than a playground on land they don't own." The next day, while Karen paraded around organizing her so-called safety meeting, Jake and I walked the perimeter of my land. His equipment pinged and beeped as we followed the old survey markers my grandfather had driven into the ground 70 years ago. "Marcus," Jake said finally, checking his tablet, "you're not crazy. These boundaries are off. By a lot." "How much?" "Enough to make 12 homeowners really nervous." "And your friend Karen? That fancy gazebo in her backyard? 8 feet onto your land." I felt a slow burn of satisfaction. For the first time since my father's funeral, the rage in my chest cooled into something sharper. Karen thought she was tightening a noose around my neck. She didn't know she was building a scaffold under her own feet. The Willowbrook clubhouse smelled like lemon polish and cheap victory when I walked in uninvited. 30 neighbors packed into folding chairs, nodding along as Karen Whitmore clicked through her PowerPoint like she was unveiling a cure for cancer. Industrial hazards. One slide read, showing grainy zoom lens photos of my workshop. Another read, protecting our property values, as if my grandfather's welding shed was a meth lab. She paused on every word like an actress hitting her marks. I stood at the back, arms folded, until someone noticed me. The room's temperature dropped 10 degrees. Karen's eyes narrowed, but she didn't miss a beat. "And that's why we're moving forward with enforcement," she said, voice bright. "For the safety of our children and the future of our neighborhood." I let the silence stretch after she finished. "Funny," I said, stepping forward, "my grandfather bought that land before any of you were even born. Safety's never been a problem until now." A few heads turned, Whispers rippled through the crowd. Karen pasted on her smile. Marcus, this is a closed meeting for HOA members only. I'm not here for your approval, I said, pulling a folded document from my jacket. I'm here to remind you the law doesn't stop at your property line. Gasps followed as I laid the deed and Jake's preliminary survey on the table. Your president is barking up the wrong tree, I continued. Half this subdivision sits on land my family never sold. Karen's hand twitched on the clicker. That's absurd, is it? I interrupted, tapping the map. Your playground? Mine. The clubhouse we're standing in? Mine. Even your backyard gazebo, Karen. 8 feet on my side of the fence. The room erupted. Shouts, questions, the kind of panic you hear when a storm siren goes off unexpectedly. Karen banged the table for order, her smile cracking like plaster. Do not listen to him, she snapped. This is misinformation. His workshop is illegal, his business dangerous, but no one was listening. People were pulling out their phones, snapping photos of the map. I'd hit a nerve. When I left the clubhouse, Karen followed, heels clattering on the pavement. What do you think you're doing? She hissed. Showing people the truth, I said. You can't threaten us. I'm not threatening anyone, I said evenly. But if you keep pushing, I'll let a court settle this. And trust me, you won't like how that ends. That night, I sat alone in my father's workshop long after Emma had gone to bed. The steel rafters groaned softly in the wind. For the first time, the weight of what I'd uncovered hit me. This wasn't just about stopping a fine. I held the power to uproot families, to bankrupt a neighborhood. Jake's survey data glowed on my laptop screen. Rebecca Santos, the attorney he'd recommended, had already left me a voicemail. Marcus, call me. We need to talk about quiet title actions and water rights. Water rights. That phrase sent a shiver through me. My grandfather's old files mentioned a natural spring on our land. I dismissed it as trivia until now, but Rebecca's message hinted it might be leverage worth more than money. I looked at Emma's half-finished shelf, the grain of oak lit by the single shop light. Did I really want to crush these people? Even if they deserved it. Especially Karen, there were kids in those houses. Families who hadn't asked for this war. But then I remembered Karen's perfume in the cemetery, her voice on my porch, her eyes watching from behind silk curtains. She wasn't just fighting dirty. She was willing to destroy me. If I didn't fight back harder, I'd lose everything my family had built. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Back off or you'll regret it. Attached was a photo of Emma in our driveway, taken that afternoon. The decision crystallized. This wasn't about a fine anymore. This wasn't about a stubborn neighbor or a line on a map. Someone had crossed into my family's life, threatened what I loved most. I dialed Rebecca and left a single message. I'm in. Do whatever it takes. The fight had just changed, and I was done playing nice. By Monday morning, my driveway looked like a command center. Rebecca Santos arrived first, sharp navy suit, legal pad in hand, the kind of calm that makes bulldogs back down. Jake followed with his GPS gear, then Dave Kowalski with his construction records. Even Elena Rodriguez, an accountant I barely knew, showed up with spreadsheets that made my head spin. I hadn't asked for an army. But after that photo of Emma, I wasn't turning anyone away. Rebecca's eyes hardened as I told her about the text. We'll add harassment and intimidation to the complaint, she said. This isn't just civil anymore, Marcus. This is criminal. Jake spread his updated survey across the hood of my truck. It's worse than we thought, he said, pointing to colored lines. 12 homes, the clubhouse, 2 roads. And Karen's precious gazebo? Still 8 feet on your side. Elena tapped her calculator. You're sitting on at least $500,000 in potential claims. Maybe more if we factor water rights. Water rights? Emma asked from the porch, arms folded. She'd overheard everything, of course. 16 and already too smart for my comfort. Rebecca crouched, so she was eye level with her. Your great-grandfather signed an agreement in 1953. It gives your family exclusive control over the spring feeding this entire subdivision. Emma's eyes widened. So, we could shut off their sprinklers? Sprinklers, fountains, retention pond, Rebecca said. If they keep pushing, we can choke off every drop. I hated the way Emma smiled at that. This wasn't a game. I didn't want her thinking revenge was victory, but I also couldn't let her see me blink. That afternoon, Karen made her next move. A certified letter, hand-delivered by a law firm with a name longer than my driveway, demanding I submit to a forced property appraisal for imminent acquisition. Rebecca read it twice, then laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. "They think they have eminent domain authority," she said. "That's not how any of this works." "Karen's doubling down," I said. "She's scared." "Good," Rebecca said. "Fear makes people sloppy. But fear also spreads." By Thursday, inspectors were swarming my property again. Fire department, zoning, even the EPA. Clipboards everywhere, flashing cameras like I'd built a toxic waste dump instead of a welding shop. They found nothing, of course. My permits were ironclad. Still, it rattled me, and it rattled Emma. I caught her watching from her bedroom window as strangers photographed the swing set her grandfather built. That night, after she went to bed, I sat in the workshop with Rebecca. The steel rafters above us groaned as the wind shifted. "You okay?" she asked. I hesitated. I keep thinking about the people in those houses. Kids playing in yards that technically belong to me. This fight could ruin them. Rebecca leaned forward. "Marcus, they're not your enemy. Karen is. The others are just collateral she's dragging into her war. That's why we play this smart. You don't burn the neighborhood down. You force Karen to the table." Her words should have reassured me. Instead, they felt heavy. My father had always said some fights weren't about winning. They were about how you fought. The pressure kept building. News crews parked near my driveway. Channel 8's Jessica Mills wanted an interview. Karen, meanwhile, was on Facebook posting photos of my shop with captions like "Industrial Menace Endangering Families." She even tried to organize another safety rally, this time with reporters invited. Emma found the posts and slammed her phone down. "Dad, you can't let her do this. People at school are talking about us like we're criminals." I put a hand on her shoulder. "This ends soon," I promised. One way or another. Rebecca's plan was simple and brutal. File a quiet title action, notify every affected homeowner, and let the panic turn on Karen. But before we could move, Karen overplayed her hand again. At 2:17 a.m., my security cameras caught a figure creeping through the dark, slashing my truck tires and spray painting move across my workshop door. The footage was crystal clear. Dale Whitmore, Karen's husband, looking right into the lens like a man too stupid to hide. The police came before dawn. Detective Rodriguez reviewed the tape, shook his head, and muttered, "Weapons-grade stupidity." Charges were filed by lunchtime. By evening, Karen was outside screaming at reporters, calling the police corrupt, calling me a criminal, calling anyone who questioned her conspirator. Her voice cracked, her mascara ran. But all I could think about was Emma, staring out the window again, watching the circus roll through her yard. I'd promised to protect her. Now was time to prove it. "File everything," I told Rebecca. "Quiet title, harassment, defamation. Whatever you've got. We're done waiting." Rebecca smiled like a chess player seeing checkmate 5 moves ahead. "Then buckle up," she said. "This is about to get loud." And she was right. The next step wouldn't just shake Karen's empire. It would shake the entire neighborhood. The Civic Center auditorium buzzed like a hornet's nest before storm. Every seat was full. Cameras from 3 local stations lined the aisles, and the mayor herself presided at the dais. What was supposed to be a neighborhood meeting had turned into a public reckoning. Karen Whitmore stepped to the microphone first. Her navy suit hung looser than usual, the stress weight loss showing in her sharp cheekbones. But her voice was as bright and brittle as ever. "Willowbrook Estates is under attack," she declared. "One man refuses to follow the rules every family here agreed to uphold. His illegal operation threatens your safety, your property values, your very way of life. Booze cut her off." Someone shouted, "What about our HOA fees?" Another, "Why are you spending our money on lawyers?" Karen's smile faltered, but she clutched the podium like a lifeline. "This is about community standards, about protecting what we've built." I rose from my seat at the front row. The crowd quieted. It wasn't me they respected. It was the heavy manila folder under my arm and the attorney standing at my shoulder. "Madam Mayor," I said, voice steady, "I'd like to respond." Mayor Williams nodded. Mr. Castellano, you have the floor. I walked to the microphone, unfolded a document, and let the big screen behind me light up with Jake's high-resolution survey. Colored lines cut across the map like veins. My grandfather bought our land in 1952. I began, letting the words hang. Before this subdivision, before any of these houses, before there was even a Willowbrook Road. This deed, I held it high so everyone could see the county seal, is older than every HOA covenant Karen Whitmore claims to enforce. A murmur rolled through the audience. I pointed to the glowing map. These are your homes. These are your streets. And this, my finger traced a red boundary, is all my land. 12 houses. The clubhouse we're standing in. The roads you drive on. Even Mrs. Whitmore's gazebo. Gasps, then a low roar. Phones whipped out. People zoomed in on the screen, checking house numbers. Rebecca stepped up beside me and clicked to the next slide. My grandfather's 1953 water rights agreement. This spring, she said, tapping the diagram, feeds every sprinkler and retention pond in Willowbrook Estates. Mr. Castellano's family has exclusive legal control. 8 years of unauthorized use. That's theft, not community standards. I turned back to the crowd. You've been paying higher fees, losing insurance coverage, and watching your property values drop because of one person's crusade. Not me. Her. The third slide appeared. Security footage of Dale Whitmore slashing my truck tires. The room erupted again. Rebecca's voice cut through the noise like a blade. This is harassment, intimidation, and criminal mischief, ordered or condoned by your HOA president. Karen lurched to her feet, voice cracking. Lies. All of it. She pointed at me, then at Rebecca, then at the mayor. You're all in on this. This is a conspiracy to destroy me. No, I said, my voice low but carrying. You destroyed yourself. I'll let the silence settle. The next slide was the HOA bylaws requiring 10 years of residency to serve as president. Karen had 8. Every decision she'd made was void. Everything she's authorized, Rebecca said, every dollar she's spending her money, every letter she's sent, illegal. She was never your president. Karen's composure shattered. She shoved past a reporter, screaming about corruption, about secret deals, about how the town was against her. Security moved in as homeowners, her own supporters, yelled questions she couldn't answer. Where's our money, Karen? Why'd you lie about your address? Did you really bribe a councilman? Mayor Williams banged the gavel. Order. This meeting is now under city mediation. Mr. Castellano, thank you for your documentation. Ms. Whitmore, you will step down immediately pending investigation. The image of Karen being escorted out, mascara streaked, heels slipping on the tile, shouting accusations no one believed, burned into my memory like a photograph. But I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired. My father's voice echoed in my head. Land remembers. But so do people. Make sure they remember for the right reasons. I turned back to the microphone. I'm not here to bankrupt families or move houses. I'm offering easement agreements and water licenses at fair market rates. I want to live in peace. I think most of you do too. The applause was thunderous. Even some of Karen's allies clapped. As I stepped away from the podium, Emma met me in the aisle. She didn't say anything, just hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. For the first time since my father's funeral, I felt the weight lift. The war was over, but the reckoning wasn't finished yet. The neighborhood was quiet again, the kind of quiet you notice only after months of living inside a storm. The cameras were gone. The reporters had moved on to the next scandal. And the Whitmore's perfect colonial sat dark and empty, a for sale sign crooked in the yard, the Italian fountain already dry and gathering leaves. Karen's downfall had been fast and merciless. When the city confirmed she'd falsified her HOA presidency, the legal actions unraveled like rotten thread. She pled to harassment and false reporting charges, probation, fines, community service. Dale took a plea on vandalism, then filed for divorce. By the time the ink dried on the settlement papers, Karen was a ghost in her own neighborhood, moving out at night to avoid the neighbors' stares. But this wasn't about her anymore. It never really was. Rebecca and I spent 6 weeks hammering out agreements with a new HOA board. Easement contracts were signed, water rights licensed at fair rates, boundary lines corrected in county records. No one lost their home. No one went bankrupt. The families Karen had used as shields now had clear titles and stability again. When the last document was filed, Rebecca handed me a copy of the quiet title judgment. "Congratulations," she said, her voice warm but tired. "You didn't just win, you built something better out of it." I wasn't sure I felt like celebrating. The victory was real, but so was the cost. I'd buried my father in the middle of this fight. I'd watched my daughter learn what fear looks like when strangers with cameras swarm your driveway. There are no real winners in a war, even when you come out on top. One evening in late spring, I lit the grill in my backyard. Not for lawyers or surveyors this time, but for neighbors. 60 people came, families who'd once glared at me from across manicured hedges, now carrying covered dishes and folding chairs. Kids ran through the grass while their parents asked about boundary markers and water flow instead of lawsuits. Emma stood beside me at the grill, taller now, sharper around the edges after what we'd lived through. "Dad," she said as she flipped a burger, "you could have destroyed them. Why didn't you?" I thought of Karen's face at the podium, cracked and desperate, and of my father's calloused hands teaching me how to square a beam. "Because Grandpa didn't raise me to win at any cost," I said. "He raised me to build, not tear down." She nodded, quiet for a moment, then smiled. "Grandpa will be proud." Later that night, after everyone left and the yard was littered with paper cups and laughter, I went into the workshop. The single shop light cast long shadows over 3 generations of tools. My grandfather's survey compass, my father's welding mask, Emma's oak shelf, finished and standing proud against the wall. I ran my hand over the workbench. The grain was worn smooth from years of use, just like the land outside, scarred, stubborn, unshakable. We protected it, not just the dirt and deeds, but the meaning behind them. Family, principle, the idea that some things are worth standing your ground for, even when it hurts. Through the open window, I could hear the sound of sprinklers hissing to life in the dark. Not stolen water anymore, but licensed, legal, shared. The same spring my grandfather marked on a yellowed map 70 years ago, now feeding lawns and gardens without bitterness. I looked up at the rafters, at the steel beams my father welded himself, and whispered into the quiet, "We did it, Dad. We kept ours." The workshop didn't answer, but the old boards creaked like they approved. As I turned off the light, I caught my reflection in the dark window, older, wearier, but standing taller than I had in months. Karen Whitmore was gone, her empire of petty power scattered, but what mattered was still here. Land remembers, so do people, and this family's name was staying on both.